Hello and welcome. You are on Strategic Insight, our weekly program in association with USI. I'm Nitin Gokhale. And in this episode, we are going to talk about the western sector on the India-China boundary, the Ladakh sector as it is more popularly known as. With me is somebody who is eminently qualified to speak about the military aspects of it, the strategic aspects of it, Lt Gen PJS Pannu, formerly a corps commander in 14 Corps in Ladakh, and a man who has commanded a division in Arunachal Pradesh against the Chinese, started his career, if I may say so, as a young lieutenant in Tawang in 1982. And somebody who's actually walked those difficult areas. Welcome, General Pannu. In fact, since you commanded 14 Corps, let me start with 14 Corps, but that's something that we will talk in detail. Tell us something more about your tenure in the early 80s in Tawang, because I'm told that what the Chinese are doing now in Ladakh is not something that you all have not faced earlier. Is that so?
Thank you, Nitin. You've taken my mind back. There's a lot of nostalgia. When you cross Sela and at a point you see Tawang Monastery for the first time and people tell you, oh, this is an ancient monastery. And then you start heading in that direction. You find there are people of Tawang. You find it very strange that it is called hidden land or hidden paradise. But when you talk to people, they all speak Hindi.
Correct.
And the evening entertainment, of course, there's a dragon dance and other things, which look very traditional, not so very well known to people in the plains. But when you start talking to them, they are Bollywood. It's a very interesting
mix of, yeah.
Yes. But coming to the subject proper of my younger days, of course, we used to patrol certain areas at that time. It was still NEFA. Arunachal Pradesh was in the making as a state, name of the state. Right. And I remember, Khandu Dorji Saab used to be a MLC there, and we used to go for walks, and he used to tell us stories of Tibet, and he used to tell us stories of this entire area of Kameng district. So my relationship, with the civilian counterparts and also understanding of the military set in very early when I started patrolling these areas, and absolutely God's own territory, very nice, simple people. We never saw Chinese at that time. We only patrolled these areas, and we could never understand where the LAC actually lies, because on the watershed, of course, the marking was known, but when you actually go there, you realize that it is a very, very difficult terrain to discern which height to which height does this line go, because it is neither surveyed nor walked together by the two sides in a similar manner, as against the international border, where it is surveyed, the international boundary is marked. So this is ambiguous area. And whenever we went to an area, we always wondered whether it lied in India or it lied in China.
You were gone into China.
Yeah, but we patrolled that area. Yeah. We were given areas that we should dominate, so we dominated those areas very well. And of course, there are a lot of stories, my getting lost in certain areas, and maybe going little away from the area and maybe inside.
Inside, yes.
From the in the Chinese so-called claimed areas. So it is very interesting.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine, because what you mentioned, I just want to, before we get into serious discussion on the boundary and all, I also want to share an incident with you. I went to Dong, which is in the eastern Arunachal sector near Walong. It's a village of 18 households, and it is on the tri-junction of India, China, Myanmar. It's supposed to be receiving the first millennium sunrise. That's the time we went there. And the Gaon Boda, the village chief, actually spoke Hindi so fluently that the photographer who went with me from Calcutta, he was astounded completely. He said, I thought, these are Chinese people. And, that's the surprise that you get when you go to Arunachal Pradesh.
Yes.
But I think even Ladakh, where you commanded in your apex of your career, as a corps commander, when you commanded there just a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, tell me, the 14 Corps was raised at the turn of the century after the Kargil conflict. The need was felt there. how far have we come in terms of defense of Ladakh and eastern Ladakh particularly now that the Chinese are on the LAC?
Nitin, when you talk about defense, obviously, you have to talk about infrastructure. Infrastructure is not only the need of the military, but also need of the civil population. The border area development programs are unfolded by the government, and the civil administration carries it. And a lot of contractors and a lot of labor is at work at various places. It is also known that the China Study Group also has been looking at it because they understand how between two countries over a period of time they have shaped up boundary negotiations and discussions, and how much area can be developed in terms of infrastructure. So it gets dictated by those guided groups like China Study Group. A lot of work has happened. When you don't have a road or you don't have a landing ground, then obviously you cannot dominate the area with vehicles. You have to either use the aerial survey or you have to go for long-range patrols, spanning over a week, 10 days, 15 days, carrying huge amount of loads on yourself. But in this particular case of Eastern Ladakh, during my time, a very important highway, that is the DSDBO, that came up to link up the DBO area, which is south of Karakoram Pass, which lays on the international border. Obviously, from my perspective or anybody else's perspective, Karakoram Pass is not disputed. It is on the international border. It is the area when you start looking at the map in the southeasterly direction, you find that there are claims which are contested by both sides. They are dictated by various operational and strategic implications from both sides, as you say, and both sides dominate these areas. These areas, there are two places where we have fixed points.
Correct.
In the DBO, we have DBO, TWD. Similarly, when you come south of Pegongso, we have Chushul, Moldo.
Correct.
So these are the 2 points again, which are fixed, where both sides come and have meetings.
Right.
So in the manner of understanding, when you have these 2 points where you have made infrastructure to meet,
right,
obviously there is some understanding that you could come from that side and we could come from this side, and we meet at that point and talk on whatever issues are there on the border.
That's right.
The other areas obviously then become a point of concern.
Yeah, exactly.
The Indian side dominates these areas through patrolling points.
Right.
As very recently, patrolling points are understood better, like PP14. Now, PP14 is nothing but one of the patrolling points, which is on the line of Indian LAC. And then it carries on, all the patrol points as marked by the Indians are the patrolling points.
Correct.
Similarly, Chinese would also be having their own patrolling points, which the serials, of course, we are not very familiar with, but they dominate those areas.
Correct.
As a result, we know that these patrols crisscross each other depending on the perceptions that they've had.
Correct.
And we have had regular face-offs, not only here, but also on the McMahon line. We had face-offs. And there is a certain drill that over a period of time, we've had the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement in 1993, the confidence building measures of 1996, and then of course in 2005 and 2013, also, in
the
confidence
BDCA of 2013.
So one is that I'm talking about the points on ground, which are fixed, and the protocols which the two sides have had on how to deal with areas which are disputed. The face-offs have a protocol and a drill in which we do not fire at each other. We do not use military means, because in the confidence building measures, we are not supposed to use military means. So when you go to your own areas of domination and they come to own area of domination, the face-offs have always been dealt by very matured protocol understanding between, and if there is any dispute, it is referred back to respective headquarters. They have a flag meeting at the BPMs in these huts, and the issues get resolved over a period of time. However, of course, in the recent history, many face-offs have happened which are abnormal in nature, where larger force levels have come, stayed over a longer period of time, such as in 2013. Then in 2017, you know that
In
what
Gokhale
happened in the
yeah.
Chumbi
But before
Valley.
that, in Chumur also, I think
Yes.
2014 there was another standoff.
Yes, in 2014 again there was a standoff, and of course, Pegongso also we've had
Has
some,
always had that issue.
the two troops resorting to some kind of a violence without using the military means.
Yes, right.
So these kind of things happened, but I would correlate these dates to some happening somewhere or the other. People may not catch these events, and they might look at these events as a standalone event, but I think there is some relation and correlation to something or the other.
So in this case, since May, that we know that these standoffs have happened at multiple, what they now call friction points. But before that, I want to ask you this. There is a report that, understanding that there are some 15 or 16 disputed areas in eastern Ladakh, starting from Trig Heights near DBO, going down to Dumshele. Now, in those, they also categorize into different categories. One is agreed disputed areas, the others are differing perceptions, and the third are the new areas that have come. Is that something that you are already familiar with, our troops are familiar with?
Thank you very much for bringing this out. When you have agreed disputed area, it means neither should you venture or nor should we venture into that area because it is agreed disputed. Why go in there? So both countries, so to say, should have laid down a limit of patrolling in those areas that we respect mutual dispute. You believe and trust that at diplomatic and political levels these disputes would get sorted out and troops would know then how much to dominate and how much not to dominate. So a moratorium is put on patrolling so that you don't go into mutually agreed disputed areas. But the problem is in the disputed areas where they are very clear that their line of perception is which we don't agree to, and our line of perception which they don't agree to. And we don't say it's a mutually disputed area because we are very certain that that area belongs to us. It is not mutually disputed.
That's right.
And from their perception, unfortunately, also they have a similar standpoint that they claim an area which is beyond what
our
we into our own claimed area.
Right.
So therefore, such disputes do come up.
Occur. So in the current context, now you mentioned that some incident is correlated to many of these standoffs. What is your assessment in this?
Let me take you back to 2013, or we can even go as far back as 1950. 1950, when two countries were still, into very nice diplomatic relations, and Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, and good Bonohomi was being built between two countries. India marked a map in 1954, but the CPC at that time was looking at the entire thing because the communist regime had set in by then and they had moved into Tibet. And they were also settling into certain areas like Xianjiang. And when they were settling in that area, they very quickly built a road just at the time when the our map was marked by the Survey of India. And we only came to know about it much later, but actually this road has taken 6 to 7 years to come up. I'm talking about the Western Highway G219, which links Lhasa to Xianjiang. When it was discovered that they built a road, obviously the road has been, been under construction. Some say 1955, but I think it started much earlier because the Silk Route, as it is, was being used in those areas, but it kept improving, to a gravel track. And in 2013, they actually blacktopped it. And they increased the size and the capacity of this road. That is the time when India was also building its infrastructure. The DSDBO had already kicked off. We were also building a road towards Demchok. More and more road construction was happening as part of the border area development and as part of the China study group
dictated
to
India,
certain
China
areas that we claim, and those are very, very undisputable claims. Right. While we claim the entire Aksai Chin, but since we've had a history here, so the infrastructure was being built up. That is the time also when the communist China offered that they would build a CPEC corridor, which is a Silk Route corridor.
Correct.
through Xinjiang.
Correct.
Xinjiang, and they would then go into the CAR.
Right.
And that is a time in 2013 when they're offering economic packages to the CAR countries. They want to get into Eurasia. They are looking at Kashgar and then, CPEC corridor. A lot of stuff was happening at that time. And to see India build roads in the same direction, I think irked them quite a bit. And now when you come to this year, 2020, which is very different, obviously, COVID happened. A lot of people started blaming China for reasons of a COVID response was not good enough. They did not handle it well. And second thing is that they started flexing the muscles all over. It is not here. They started flexing
Japan
the
to
muscles
Bhutan,
all over.
as I say, yeah.
All over. What they are doing in Nepal, 2017, they went into Bhutan.
Yes.
And of course, many other countries, which is beyond the purview of our discussion.
Right.
But per se, Eastern Ladakh only looks isolated happening. But if you really join all these dots together, they do not want any disturbance, any infrastructure to be built in this area. When you say Ladakh is the land of passes, they're very sensitive to India building any infrastructure towards any pass, which would make the Indian troops cross the terrain and look towards the 219.
That's right.
And they are so sensitive that per se when Galwan track was being built, that actually goes into an area where you have a direct access into certain interiors. The Galwan Valley continues to move in the easterly and southeasterly direction, which would make the Indian forces should, according to them, Indian forces should want to make a projection in that area much more convenient. So I think there was a lot of interplay with what we were doing.
There's a lot of correction.
2020 as a year, which is different from any other year. Right. And again, joining the dots of 2013, 2014, 2017, and 2020.
Correct. No, you're right, absolutely. I mean, you have to have that sweep of history really to look at, what's happening. It cannot happen in isolation like you have mentioned.
Yes.
Let's look ahead a little bit. I mean, this whether this standoff gets resolved to everybody's satisfaction or not, the jury is still out, the discussions are still on. But going forward, and now that Ladakh has now become the union territory, as a military man, as a strategic thinker, what should be India's stance? I mean, what should India do to not only secure Ladakh, but also make sure that, the Chinese don't try the misadventure again? What would be your prescription really?
Starting with Article 370, which is a political action on an article which was temporary in nature. Yes. I think when the article came into being, it was even before the Constitution of India, was formalized. It was, I think, opportunistic and a very, temporary clause which was inserted to assuage the feelings of the then political establishment in the Kashmir, which was then becoming part of India, but in a very special way, because certain agreements had already been hinted at that, some autonomy would be given to them. So Article 370, as a temporary measure, was introduced. Now, between then and now, almost 70 years, a temporary article cannot be continued to remain a permanent fixture.
Sure.
So, a political decision has been taken.
Correct.
For a military person, really speaking, political decisions can actually turn into certain misadventures on certain claimed areas, because then you are extending the provisions of Article 370 to a line which is your claimed area.
Right.
And when you look at the international border, obviously it has a ramification of sentiments into Aksai Chin and also into POK.
Exactly.
Because people would ask a question that now the Article 370, is it applicable to Aksai Chin or it is to Gilgit-Baltistan?
Exactly.
Well, the answer is that if you are claiming those areas, so under the claimed areas, there would be an extension of the spirit of the new, understanding of the article or removal of the article. So, yes, there is a political connotation to it. As far as military is concerned, military is nothing but a arm of the government of India.
Extension, yes.
It is an extension. It would certainly look at maintaining a status quo on where we are currently. Neither on its own military can alter the status quo on the line of control, nor on the line of actual control. So our job is to maintain the status quo, unless the adversary disturbs it. And that is how the military comes into play. As far as the status quo is concerned, our understanding of the LAC and the line of control is where the military continues to develop military infrastructure, and also a military officer, a general, is given a task. You have to defend this territory. And he defends this territory. While there is an international convention that all these borders will remain under the purview of Ministry of Interior, as the international understanding is, which translates into Ministry of Home Affairs. So if you want peace to prevail as a larger understanding, these borders should remain under the Ministry of Home Affairs, because the borders seem to be settled. And I think in one of the other episodes, we were talking about that India looks at these borders as peaceful borders, or we desire to bring peace
That's
there.
right.
But if you're going to look at these borders as future borders to contest, I think we need to look at it whether they should remain with the Ministry of Home Affairs, or should they be given to Ministry of Defense to defend these borders and to make sure that you do a military management on these borders.
That's a new thought, actually, and
Yes.
you're right that that becomes a military secondary task in a way, because otherwise you train to fight, you train to be aggressive while you're fighting. But this task is analogous to military's instincts, I would say. I mean, I don't know whether you agree to that. But the fact that you have to manage the borders and constantly adhere to the CBMs may at some point strain the military, in a way. So should we have some new protocols? Should we have a new arrangement to manage that border? Is something that you're hinting at if it comes to the MOD?
I will again go back a little back into the history and I come and answer this question. Whenever I look at the McMahon line and
In
the
Arunachal Pradesh, yeah.
watershed principle behind it,
Correct.
political entity or diplomatic entity looks at these borders very differently as against what the military looks like.
True.
When you draw a line which goes from a trig height to trig height, how does a military general look at defending that line? He would obviously want to go and sit on top of that ridge line.
Correct.
If you leave that ridge line, obviously you've given it up. And if the adversary comes and occupies it, such as Thagla Ridge for that matter, then it goes into the hands of adversary.
Correct.
So if you've drawn a line which is on the watershed, which military should occupy the watershed? And any military which leaves the watershed has lost that ground.
Lost, exactly.
Because as the lay of the terrain is, the next nala or the next ridge line could be 25 to 30 to even 50 kilometers away.
So
and you cannot go and
yeah.
occupy the next height.
Right.
So on a map, it would appear that you have given 50 to 60 kilometers of line. Correct. So as a result, the military would want to go and sit on the watershed.
Right.
And similarly, the adversary's military would also want to come and sit on the watershed.
So peaks are the high grounds that you always need to occupy.
Absolutely. So that is one aspect where a diplomat drawing a boundary and for a military officer to defend the boundary, there is a little perceptual difference of understanding.
True.
Similarly, when you are to defend the territory, not only that you want to occupy these heights, but you also need to defend the passes. As I was saying that it is a land of passes called Ladakh. Anybody who defends these passes or dominates these passes are the ones who would be able to manage these heights well, because these are the places from where you will get access to the land on the opposite side. Right. In this particular case, most of the passes, unfortunately, have been held by China. And whichever passes are not held or lie on the disputed area, there is a constant race for the passes. Right. And if the decision is to be taken on claims, a military officer would always draw a line of claims which include certain passes towards their own side. And obviously, militaries would think alike, and the disputes arise. Correct. If the military has to defend the territory, obviously, you would want those passes to be with your own military to occupy, dominate, and consolidate those positions and build defenses there. But since under protocols that the LAC is not settled and there are 22 boundary negotiations which are happening, which are not yet seen to be agreeing on a particular line. If the line had been agreed to, yes, there was no requirement of military to be sitting there. The military goes and sits there because there's a dispute.
Because there's a dispute, yeah, exactly.
Because there's a dispute, both militaries are active there. If both militaries are active, there are face-offs there.
And,
if there are both face-offs there, if the moment you build infrastructure, even before you are competent enough and you empower your military to go through the infrastructure development and occupy those areas, these kind of activities such as Galwan incident and other incidents do unfold. So as a result, we have to choose to defend a line, which, according to how anybody would think, is not disputed. But it doesn't mean that where you defend your line only becomes your
claim
front line.
A front line.
So it doesn't become your front line. The front lines don't have to be given up just because there's a defensive line. So the military would obviously look at consolidating in certain areas. But the two countries, or in fact, if you talk about Pakistan also, the three countries now in this particular case are nuclear powers. Why would you have such strong military to be deployed? Because is that how you're going to fight a conventional battle and decide how you would settle a boundary dispute? Because it can very quickly escalate into something totally different. Because all-out war is not
in anybody's interest.
Fighting, or also not fighting just ridge lines. All-out war can take you to shooting missiles and even going nuclear.
Modern wars can get into different domains.
So best situation, even now, militarily, is that what is being decided between the two corps commanders are to amicably separate the two forces. Till the time the boundary gets settled by the political and the diplomatic community who have been at work for very long and give them an opportunity to settle the boundary dispute. But to say that, look, our interests are our interests and we don't care about your interests and vice versa, I think this will then continue to keep the situation the way it is, which would mean that you will continue to build military forces in those areas. And both sides will continue to bring more infrastructure, which is military in nature. More belligerence will happen. The chances of accidents go up, which I think mature nations should make an endeavor to prevent.
I think you are absolutely right, and I think I'm going to end on that note, because this is something that one has been talking about for a decade or so, that ultimately when the boundary is settled, there has to be some give and take which is mutually agreeable to both sides. And for that, the country needs to be prepared. The public opinion needs to be prepared for that kind of a give and take, not surrender, as anybody would think, but a kind of respectable give and take will have to happen. I'm sure that's something that you are hinting at. But I think you've given a great insight into what Ladakh means, a land of passes, and also how passes are important. I think on that note, I'm going to end this episode of Strategic Insight. We'll come back with more on maybe the maritime issue and how India and China face off in the maritime domain in the next few episodes, and also look at the air power comparison, or how the two air forces face off. But for the moment, let me thank General Pannu for his insights and his thoughts, and of course request you to keep watching us on StratNews Global. And keep liking us on our social media platforms. We welcome any feedback that you have, and we will take up suggestions if you make them, which are practical. And of course, come back with more in the next episode of Strategic Insight. Until the next time, it's goodbye.